Yes, Martin!
You remember the nuclear power plant in Fukushima that had a meltdown after the big earthquake in 2011? 494 Olympic-sized swimming pools of contaminated water are stored there right now. In tanks, of course.
What do you mean, contaminated water?
Water used to cool the out-of-control fuel rods, rainwater that leaked into the damaged building, and groundwater from the mountains. All of that accumulated in the destroyed reactor, came into contact with the exposed fuel, and got contaminated with radiation. That water.
You mean the treated water, right? Hasn't it been treated?
The water stored in the tanks was run through a system called ALPS, which can reduce the concentration of 62 different types of radioactive material. But ALPS can't remove tritium. That's why people call it tritium water.
Okay. But what is tritium?
Tritium is a radioisotope of hydrogen. Having one proton and two neutrons within its nucleus, tritium is less stable than hydrogen. Being unstable, it releases electrons, beta particles, and an anti-electron neutrino from its neutron. Then, that neutron becomes a proton. It's called beta decay. Tritium becomes a stable helium-3 atom with two protons and one neutron in its nucleus.
So tritium is a radioactive substance that emits beta rays.
The contaminated water stored at Fukushima Daiichi contains 860 trillion becquerels of tritium.
I've heard of becquerels. Is that a unit of radioactivity?
It's a measurement of the number of atoms that decay in 1 second. So every second, 860 trillion tritium atoms decay and emit beta rays. That's how much tritium there is.
I hear the word half-life quite often these days.
It refers to the length of time it takes a certain amount of radioactive substance to decrease by half. Half-life varies by radioactive substance, so the risk of exposure varies with it.
What is half-life of tritium?
12 years.
After 12 years, there are still 430 trillion becquerels.
And after 300 years, 50 million becquerels. See, the risk of exposure remains well after a single half-life.
That's a mind-boggling amount. I can't begin to imagine how long it would take to disappear completely. Though there are over 62 other radioactive elements in the water, tritium is far and away the most prevalent, so people call it tritium water. Is tritium dangerous? I understood that tritium is a hydrogen molecule that emits radiation.
Well, when oxygen and hydrogen come together, what do they become?
Water.
Tritium is a kind of hydrogen, so...
It fuses with oxygen and becomes water?
That's right. That's tritium water. It's much heavier than ordinary water. Tritium can be naturally occurring, produced in nuclear experiments, or emitted from fuel rods, as in nuclear reactors. All of this tritium exists in the environment as tritium water.
Water that emits radiation.
It's impossible for the body to distinguish ordinary water from tritium water, so it is incorporated into the body as if it were ordinary.
It's the same with iodine, right? The body cannot distinguish between radioactive and non-radioactive iodine, so the radioactive type gathers in the thyroid. Strontium is similar to calcium, so it tends to collect in the bones, right?
Right. Tritium water becomes a part of cells and blood, so instead of collecting in a single organ, it travels throughout the whole body, and emits radiation from within the cells and blood.
It irradiates you from the inside.
There are some data suggesting there is a causal relationship between tritium exposure and symptoms where the white blood cells and platelets abnormally decrease. There's no such thing as harmless radiation. Tritium is not harmless.
Wait, is it okay to flush something like that into the ocean?
Good question. Tokyo Electric has expressed the intention to release the tritium-contaminated water currently in the Fukushima Daiichi tanks into the ocean. Those tanks contain roughly 860 trillion becquerels of tritium. There is some variation between the tanks, but the average concentration of tritium is said to be roughly 730,000 becquerels per liter.
The maximum concentration of tritium to be introduced to the ocean is 60,000 becquerels per liter.
If thinned with water, the concentration of tritium may go down, but the absolute amount of tritium itself won't change, will it?
I suppose it won't.
On top of that, the contaminated water continues accumulating and will do so in the future. If the tritium is released into the Pacific Ocean, there is a possibility that it will eventually travel to the west coast of the United States. Cesium-134 that leaked into the Pacific after the 2011 accident was ultimately detected off the coast of Vancouver, BC, after all.
It happened over a long time, thinning out as it went, ultimately resulting in a low concentration, but it nevertheless did arrive.
It's not just Fukushima's issue, is it?
It's ours too.
Let's think about our future together.